Okay? All right, now, I'm going to give each of you a couple of pieces of information that is not on the juror information sheet, but is consistent with what is on the juror information sheet. Okay. Mr. Burleson, you have an older brother who served pen time for burglary. Okay? Pen time. You've been to the TDC. And you don't drink yourself, but you're not opposed to drinking. Okay? Okay. Mrs. Ford, you were a witness to an assault in a bar 3 years ago, and you testified for the state in that case. Okay? And second, your husband works in the AG's office in the Enforcement Division, represents the state in federal habeas, and he talked about his work. Okay? In the Enforcement Division. Mr. Bird, you served on the grand jury 2 years ago.
I'll be judged if you want.
You were once arrested for DWI. You were released and you were appointed. It's a civil suit. Mr. Daly, your brother's a highway patrolman. Your brother's a highway patrolman. You see him 4 or 5 times a year and he talks about his work. And most importantly, your religion is Church of Christ. You don't drink, you don't see anyone else drinking. Don't include anyone else. All right, and be lively and don't just sit there and flat and participate. As long as it's consistent with what's in the juror information form, the sky's the limit. Okay, are y'all ready? All right, so the game rules are that we're going to have a truncated version of a voir dire just to give you a feeling for what it's like. Four of your colleagues are the jury panel. The prosecution will have 20 minutes, the defense will have 20 minutes, and if there is an occasion for either to make a challenge for cause, then instead of bringing the panel member up to the bench where he couldn't hear what was going on, we'll simply have the panel member stand up in his or her seat and the lawyers can question it there so that you can hear what's happening in the challenge for cause phase. And then after we're done, the lawyers will share with you their philosophy and ideas on effective voir dire, and then you can ask any questions of them that you want. Ken, you want to introduce our guests? And
Sure.
Start.
May I ask you a quick question?
Sure.
Are we gonna, if there's a challenge for cause, am I to do it during the course of my voir
Yeah,
dire?
why don't we do that? Just, I realize that you may want to do it later, but just for the purpose of this demonstration, let's do it that way. Okay, Ken?
Okay. The two people who are going to give the demo tonight are very special for different reasons. I started law practice in 1980, and during that time there was one person, and through all of the 80s and 90s, there's one person who stood out in the county attorney's office who's tried more DWI cases than anyone else during all that time. That is Cynthia Bell, who is now an assistant district attorney. But Cynthia tried so many DWI cases, it was almost like somebody could just throw a file on the way to the courtroom. She could walk in and do the voir dire and never miss a beat. That's how adept she became. But anyway, those of us in the clinic are fortunate that she finally left the county attorney's office because we don't have to deal with her as much as we used to because it was tough. But Cynthia graduated from the University of Houston in 1984 and worked for Small Creek for a couple of years and worked in the county attorney's office from 1987 until the beginning of this year, and since that time she's been an assistant district attorney. Now, this is Sam Bassett, who was a student in the clinic in 1987 and graduated from law school here in 1988. And in all the time the clinic has been in existence, I only know one clinic student who was ever hired by a clinic supervisor to go work in private practice, and that is Sam. Sam went to work for Bill Allison's law firm in 1988, and he's now a named partner in Allison, Yeager, and Bassett. So anyway, I'm going to turn it over to these two and get out of the way. Thanks.
Bell procedure?
Let me call the case first, Bell. As usual, you're jumping the gun. At this time, we'll call the case of State versus Alvarez for purposes of jury selection. It's a state ready?
That's right, Your Honor.
Is the defense ready?
Defense is ready, Your Honor.
Ms.
I don't know where
Bell,
my client is, but I'm sure he's on.
you may begin with the jury.
Thank you, Your Honor. May it please the court, counsel. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this is the part of the trial that's called voir dire. And what that means, literally, the French, and I'm mispronouncing the French, but it means to speak the truth. And what we're here to do today, and I know it may seem to you that I'm talking to you the whole time, but that's not really what I want to do. What I think is important about voir dire is that you talk to me. And I realize that it makes people uncomfortable sometimes to talk in front of a large group of people, but please feel free to speak up if you have a question that you want to ask me or something that you think I'm not covering that you'd like to know about. Feel free to interrupt me, because that's what's really important, is that I get your impressions of the case and your impressions of questions that I'm going to ask you about. So I'd appreciate it if you would please be vocal. This is a DWI trial. That's driving while intoxicated. It's a criminal offense, and it carries a criminal penalty. This is different from a civil proceeding. Has anyone ever, I looked at your juror cards, but has anyone ever been on a civil jury or a criminal jury? Yes, Miss, what your name please for the court order?
Mrs. Cora M. Ford.
Miss Ford, you served on what kind of a jury?
I was a, oh, I'm sorry, I wasn't on a jury.
You weren't on a jury.
No,
so-
no.
I see.
My history is very new to me.
I was on a grand jury, does that count?
Certainly it does. And you are,
Bird, John Bird.
and you were on a grand jury?
Yeah, I was on a grand jury once.
And how long did you serve on this grand jury? Were you just on one?
Yeah, I was just on one grand jury.
Okay. Were you the foreman?
No.
Was that the only grand jury that you ever served on?
Yes, it was.
Okay. Is there anything about that experience that would cause you to be an unfair juror in this trial? I mean, obviously you got to listen to a lot of criminal cases, but did they involve very many DWIs, or do you recall?
No, they didn't.
All right. So is there anything about that particular experience that would cause you to be unfair to the defendant in this case?
Not that I know of.
Okay. So is that the only jury experience that we have? Okay. I'll take it by your silence that it is. In any event, this case is driving while intoxicated, and it is a misdemeanor. That's different from a felony offense in that it does not carry penitentiary time, all right? It would carry a penalty of jail time, which is, different from the penitentiary not being sent to Huntsville. The range of punishment is up to 2 years in the Travis County Jail and/or a $2,000 fine. Now, does everyone understand that we're here talking about a criminal lawsuit? Sometimes people get confused about that. This is not about money or anything else. It's about depriving someone of their liberty and possibly fining them. Does everybody understand what we're doing here? Okay, that being the case, does anybody have a problem sitting in judgment on a criminal case? I have a lot of people tell me that for whatever reason, whether it's religious or moral, they simply do not feel comfortable sitting in judgment of another person and possibly causing them to be deprived of their liberty. Does anyone feel that way here? So everybody wouldn't have any problem in the event that I prove up the case beyond a reasonable doubt, sending this person to jail possibly. Okay. Is there anyone here that doesn't drink at all? You don't drink, and you are, mister?
Hold on a second, I forgot my name. Daly, Tom D. Daly.
Daily? So, do you mind if I ask you why you don't drink?
I'm a member of the Church of Christ, and my religion, we don't drink and we don't respect anybody who does drink.
So, this is a religious conviction of yours.
Yeah.
Do you think it's immoral to drink?
It's immoral and it's against God's word.
Now, all right, obviously this particular offense involves alcohol, the consumption of alcohol. So now, let me ask you a couple of questions about that. You understand that the offense here is being intoxicated while you're driving.
Yeah.
Okay. You're opposed to anybody just drinking at any time, anywhere, any place, whether it involves driving or not?
Right.
Well, let me ask you this. If I present my evidence and you don't believe my evidence beyond a reasonable doubt, you will receive a charge from the court, okay? And the charge will tell you what the law in the case is. The judge will give you the law, all right? And I'm required to prove up certain elements for purposes of this offense, okay? I'm required to prove up certain elements in order for this defendant to be found guilty of the offense with which he's charged, all right? One of those elements is that while driving or operating a motor vehicle, this defendant in this case had lost the normal use of his mental and physical faculties. You understand that?
Yeah.
All right. Let's say hypothetically that I presented my evidence and you did not believe beyond a reasonable doubt that this defendant had lost the normal use of his mental and physical faculties while he was operating a motor vehicle. Could you follow the charge of the court and find him not guilty?
Now, if I have a doubt that he was drinking and driving.
I have a doubt that if you do not believe beyond a reasonable doubt that he had lost the normal use of his mental and physical faculties, which is one of the elements, right, that I'm required to
Because he
prove.
was drinking. Because he was drinking, right?
Right, because of the introduction of alcohol into his system. But if you didn't believe that beyond a reasonable doubt, if my evidence were not sufficient for your purposes to prove that up, could you find him not guilty, follow the charge of the court and find him not guilty?
Yeah.
Okay. That's all we're asking you to do, is to look at the evidence objectively and be fair about it. And you think you can do that?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, does anyone else have similar religious convictions to Mr. Daly's? I'm assuming the rest of you drink.
I don't.
You don't drink either, and your name?
I'm Jimmy Burleson.
And do you mind if I ask you why you don't drink, Mr. Burleson?
I just never found it that appealing.
So it has nothing to do with any religious or moral convictions?
Well, I am Baptist, but some of the Baptists are pretty staunch about that, but that's not the reason I don't drink.
Do you think it's immoral for other people to drink?
No, it doesn't bother me.
Okay. So you wouldn't have any trouble at all sitting on a case where alcohol was involved in the crime?
I guess not.
Okay. Your name again, Miss Ford?
Ford.
Do you drink?
Yes, I do.
Have you ever been intoxicated?
Well, my husband says so.
Your husband says so? Okay. Do you mind if I ask you a little bit about that?
No, go ahead.
Do you recall what kind of symptoms, let's say, you experienced when you were intoxicated? Or what did your husband observe about your behavior that caused him to believe you were intoxicated?
Well, I can recall some of the symptoms. I had lost some of my bearings, felt a little dizzy, laughed a lot.
Laughed a lot, okay. Do you think that possibly you might have smelled of alcohol?
Well, I hope not, but it's possible.
Okay. Do you think that you are less capable of driving or operating a motor vehicle when you're intoxicated, when you were in that state?
When I was intoxicated?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So do you think that being intoxicated impairs your ability to drive a motor vehicle?
Being intoxicated, yes.
Okay. And while I'm on that subject, is there anyone here that thinks that driving while intoxicated should not be against the law? I've actually had a man from Iowa one time hold up his hand and say how they used to drive around on the farm all the time drunk. Nobody ever got hurt. Does anybody feel that way? Does everybody feel like DWI is a good law, so it should be enforced? You do?
It's a good law, it should be enforced.
Do you think is there anyone that thinks it's enforced too vigorously, that we prosecute DWI too often?
Well, I think it's got special treatment under the law. I mean, the prosecutors are a lot more adamant about that than the other misdemeanor, but as far as whether that's right or wrong, I mean, I don't know.
But do you think that's wrong?
I don't know. I guess that's their job. They have the prerogative to enforce whatever they feel like is more important to enforce.
Well, let me suggest this to you, that the legislature is the body that has given driving while intoxicated special treatment. And as a prosecutor, we just enforce the laws that have been enacted by the legislature. So, and the legislature is representative of the people, wouldn't you agree? All right. Has anybody ever heard anything about an intoxilizer? I'm sorry.
Bird.
Bird?
Bird, yeah.
And what have you heard about an intoxilizer?
I've seen it. I mean, I got arrested once, but they're dead wrong about it.
Oh, I see. You were arrested for driving while intoxicated?
Yeah, but he was wrong about it. It was. I mean, they let me go when I blew into the toxicology.
Do you mind if we could explore this a little bit more?
No, that's fine. I
Okay.
wasn't guilty at all.
So you were pulled over for what? Can you tell me what you were pulled over for?
Just I don't know. May have been speeding.
Some traffic violation?
Yeah, just
Okay.
a little.
And a police officer came up to you, and did you do any field sobriety tests?
Yeah, I did.
And he thought that you didn't pass these tests?
Yeah, we were on a big old slope. I mean, it's hard to keep your balance coming out of a car on a hill.
Okay, and so then he told you he was going to take you downtown and administer an intoxicator test?
Yeah, exactly.
And you agreed to do that?
Yeah, I did because I wasn't drunk.
Do you mind if I ask what you blew?
It was .09, I think, and they let me go.
And so they let you leave?
They let me leave, let me drive home.
Okay, would you consider that to be a bad experience?
It definitely was a bad experience. I mean, sure intimidating when the cop comes out of the car and, starts accusing you of something you didn't do.
Would that cause you to be incapable of being unbiased in judging a police officer's testimony? Because I'll tell you right now, and I'm not allowed to go into the specific facts of the case, but rest assured that I will be calling some police officers in this case, as I'm sure that anyone could surmise. Are you going to be able, because of this experience you had, are you going to be able to look at them fairly and judge their credibility just as you would any other witness?
I mean, they're only human. They make mistakes just like everybody else.
But
in my
because-
case, they made a mistake.
Well, let me suggest this to you. In fact, a mistake was not made. Wouldn't you agree? Because had you been drinking at all?
Yeah, I'd had like one drink.
And so you might have smelled of alcohol. Would you agree with that? That's possible.
It's possible, yeah. It's just
Okay.
been a few minutes before.
And in conjunction with a traffic violation, and on top of that, smelling of alcohol, all right, it's possible that the police officer might have had reason to believe that maybe you were not in the best condition to drive a vehicle. But he took you down, you agreed to take an intoxicalizer test, and sure enough, it verified what you knew, that you were not intoxicated. You only had one drink, you blew a .09. They let you go. So there really was not a mistake made. Isn't that fair to say?
Well, he thought I was drunk, yeah. He was wrong.
But you believe in the intoxicalizer, particularly now? You think it's an accurate way to measure blood alcohol?
Well, I don't know. It showed I wasn't drunk, so I
And
guess
you weren't, right?
And I wasn't.
So it worked out,
It worked out just fine for me.
That's right, okay. Has anyone else had a similar experience to that? Has anyone had bad experience with a police officer that would cause them just not to be able to listen to any kind of testimony from a police officer at all? No? All right. Now, has everyone heard of field sobriety tests, and do you understand what they are? A set of simple tests that people are asked to do on the side of the road that measure simple agility. Anything that a 5-year-old child could do these tests. Stand on one foot, count backwards from 30, take your index finger, touch your nose with your eyes closed, things like that. Is there anyone here that if it's an otherwise healthy person, is there anyone here that thinks that kind of test is just simply unfair?
Yeah.
You do?
Sure, it can be. I mean, it can be pretty intimidating. Those guys can make you pretty nervous out there. I apparently messed it up to his satisfaction, so. It can be pretty intimidating, and I wasn't drunk.
I understand. And you were not arrested for DWI?
I was arrested,
But you were released. You were not
Yes, I was.
charged with DWI?
No, I wasn't.
Okay. So things worked out. That's all I want you to, that's what I'm trying to convey here. The system worked in that situation. Would you agree?
Yeah, but, I mean, I don't know if he took me in on those tests, then he was wrong.
Are you sure that you're going to be able to look at a police officer's testimony and judge his credibility just as you would any other witness? It seems to me that you have some animosity still remaining over that episode.
Well, I mean, like I said, they're really only human, and they're capable of making mistakes. And the guy who talked to me that night made a mistake. it's certainly possible that anyone can make a mistake. I'm sure they're right, a lot of the times too.
Are you gonna be able to be unbiased in judging a police officer's testimony? Are you sure you're not gonna have some holdover of animosity for police officers in general because of this episode that happened to you?
Yeah, I guess so.
You guess of what?
I guess it really depends on what he has to say.
Okay. Now are you Mr. Bird?
Yeah.
Okay. Let me ask you, Mr. Burleson, who's the medical aide? Mr. Daly, you're the medical aide? Ms. Ford, I see that your husband is an attorney.
Yes, that's right.
Can you tell me what kind of law he practices?
He works for the AG's office,
In what division?
in the enforcement division.
Do you ever talk with him about his cases?
Oh, yes, all the time.
And what kinds of things do you discuss?
Oh, he just tells me the stories involved in different cases, just sort of marital talk about your job, how things are going.
Is there anything about the things you talk about with respect to his job that's going to cause you to not be a good juror in this case?
No.
Nothing? Now, I noticed that you've also been a witness in a criminal case. Do you mind telling me about that?
No, I was a witness to an assault in a bar about 3 years ago.
And can you tell me a little bit about what happened?
Sure. My husband and I went out for a drink after work one evening, and two men got into a fight. I witnessed the fight. I was facing the direction where it took place, and I saw the one man strike the other to initiate the fight. And just words had been exchanged at that point. So I testified for the state in that case.
Okay. Is there anything about that experience that would cause you to be an unfair or biased juror in this case?
No.
Now, does everybody understand that in driving while intoxicated, the state does not have to prove that someone is falling down slobbering drunk? Does everybody understand that? I think sometimes we have confusion between intoxication, which the legal definition is loss of the normal use of one's mental and physical faculties, but that does not equate with being slobbering, falling down drunk. You don't have to be throwing up. You don't have to be tripping over your feet. Does everyone understand that? It's a very subtle loss that is all that we have to prove, okay? Is everybody comfortable with that? Is there anyone here that's going to hold the state to a higher burden and force me to prove that this person was visibly slobbering drunk, which is commonly used to describe someone that's extremely intoxicated? Does everyone understand that the legal definition in intoxilizer, it's in excess of 0.10 or higher? All right, that is the legal definition. We can prove up either loss of mental faculties, one, loss of physical faculties, that's the second, or blood alcohol level of 0.10 or higher. Any one of those three things is sufficient to find this defendant guilty. If you find any one of those, if you find two, that's great. If you find all three, that's even better. All right, does everyone understand that? But any one of those is sufficient to find him guilty. All right? How am I doing on time?
5 minutes.
Thank you. Okay. Now, Mr. Bird, I see you're a businessman, Presidio Enterprises. Can you tell me what that kind of business that is?
We sell computer parts, just systems.
Okay. Now, Mr. Daly, I see that you have a member of your family is a peace officer.
Yeah, he works for the DPS.
And how close is this family member?
I beg your pardon?
How close is this family member? Is it a brother?
He's my brother.
All right. Do you ever talk to him about his cases?
Yeah.
Is he a patrolman or is he in administration?
Trooper.
Okay. has he ever told you about arresting people for driving while intoxicated?
Yeah, he's told me some funny stories.
Have you ever gone out and ridden with him in his patrol car or anything like that?
No,
So you've never been present during any of these arrests?
no.
Is there anything about your conversations with your brother about these cases? Is there anything about those conversations that would cause you to be an unfit or unfair juror in this case?
I don't think so.
Okay.
He has told me about that intoxilizer thing, and that it's pretty accurate, but that's about it.
Do you have any personal knowledge of the intoxilizer other than that? Is intoxilizer evidence something that you would like to hear, though?
That'd be interesting.
Is intoxilizer evidence, the same question to everyone, is that the kind of evidence that you would be interested in hearing? Would that be something that you think would help you decide whether or not this defendant was guilty or not guilty? Is there anybody that has the opinion that the intoxilizer is a worthless machine and doesn't measure anything?
We don't have to, I mean, we don't have to accept as proof. I mean, we'll get to hear evidence about the intoxilizer, right? We don't have to
Certainly, I
accept
anticipate.
it as completely accurate just based on your word.
No, I will, and I anticipate bringing evidence about the intoxilizer. Particularly, I'll bring a chemist from the police department who will testify about it, and I will bring the intoxilizer operator who will testify about how he operated the machine and whether or not it was operating properly and things of that nature. Does anyone have any questions of me?
One thing, I don't drink a whole lot, so I don't understand as far as like the intoxilizer, doesn't have anything to do with the number of beers you have. I mean, I don't understand what intoxication exactly means. Is it a certain number of beers or drinks or whatever someone has? What do you guys are talking about 0.10 and all this stuff? And he said he had one beer and he blew up 0.09, and that's almost enough, but he only had one beer. So I'm kind of confused as far as like, is it an amount of alcohol?
Well, actually, you will hear evidence on those issues, and I'm not allowed to stand down here and basically testify to you about how the intoxilizer operates or how much one would have to drink to reach a certain level. There will be evidence from qualified chemists about that particular thing. But what the intoxilizer does measure is one's blood alcohol concentration. And under the legal definition, which has been set by the legislature has said that a person is intoxicated if one's blood alcohol level is 0.10 or greater. You will hear evidence with respect to that particular issue. But it's not appropriate for me to stand down here and tell you, my perceptions of the way it works and the like. It's also the legal definition that if you have lost your mental or your physical faculties, which would be exhibited by things like being unable to perform a field sobriety test, or slurring one's speech, or being unable to say your ABCs, things like that exhibit loss of one's mental faculties. So, and you will hear evidence about all these different things. Does anyone else have a question? I'm going to let the defense attorney speak with you now. Thank you for your attention.
Okay. What I want you all in the audience to do right now is, before Mr. Bassett starts, this is juror 1, 2, 3, and 4. Write down on a piece of paper, S for state, D for defense. Whether you think the juror, from what you've heard so far, is a state's juror or a defense juror. Okay? 1, 2, 3, 4, S and D, just from what you've heard so far. And then we'll see if you've changed your minds or gotten more insight at the end of the whatever. Mr. Bassett?
My name's Sam Bassett, and I represent Victor Alvarez in this case. And Ms. Bell has done a very fine job of talking to you about the type of case this is. If you're selected as a juror in this case, you will decide whether or not on January 10th of 1992, Mr. Alvarez operated a motor vehicle while intoxicated. Talked a lot about intoxication and the different types, different ways the state can prove intoxication. What this process is about right now is who can be a fair juror for this case. It's very important to remember that, because not every person is a fair juror for every case. Just a light example. I have a black lab. I love my dog. I take care of my dog. I probably take care of him a little too much. If I were called as a juror in an animal cruelty case, it might be difficult for me to set aside my love for animals. So, this isn't an animal cruelty case, obviously. This is a DWI case. One of the things I'm trying to do is to learn from you about your personal experience, your life experience, to determine whether or not you're the proper juror for this case. Doesn't mean you're a bad person if you're not the right juror for this case. So I'd like you to really feel free to talk to me about those things, and if it's something that's private, we can approach the bench and discuss it more privately. The first thing I'd like to do is to talk a little bit about the general constitutional rights that Mr. Alvarez enjoys in a criminal trial. Those aren't the rights just he enjoys, they're the rights you and I enjoy. One of the things I'd like to talk about are the concepts of presumption of innocence and beyond a reasonable doubt. Let's suppose, Ms. Ford, let's suppose you pick up the Austin paper and read that X and Y are arrested for murder. What's the first thing that pops in your mind? What do you think about X and Y?
Probably that they probably did it.
Why do you think that?
It's because that's the assumption that you make in a newspaper, that even though they say they've just been arrested, that it's just the truth.
Anybody else have any thoughts? Mr. Daly, what do you think about that? Pick up the newspaper, read the headline. It doesn't have to be the headline, but see the...
They did it. They were stupid enough to get caught and they're stupid enough to have done it.
Anybody think anything different? How many of you stop and say, God, you know, I know the newspaper says that they caught the right people, but I'm going to presume them innocent, and I sure hope they got the right people. Sure hope these people aren't. How many of you, that's your first reaction? No, it's not mine. What we do in this country, when you come in the courtroom, is we ask you to set that aside completely and presume Mr. Alvarez guilty. I mean, presume Mr. Alvarez innocent. I hope you're presuming. You presume him innocent until the state proves to you beyond a reasonable doubt. Now, in Texas, over the last year, the courts have just started giving a definition of reasonable doubt. So you'll have the benefit of that definition. But I suggest to you it's a very high standard. I'm not going to get into the details of the definition. But the question I have for you is, why do we require people like you to presume someone innocent in a criminal courtroom in this country? You have any ideas, Mr. Bowles?
Well, I guess it's something, it's better to let a guilty person go than convict an innocent. Seems like that's the way we run a system.
Okay. Why do you think that is? Why is it better? Is it better? First of all, I'll say, is it better? And then second of all, I'll say, obviously you think it's better. Why?
Well, I don't know. I mean, put yourself in that guy's shoes. You'd hate to be spending jail time for something you didn't do. On the other hand, if you're guilty and you go free, I guess you're not so upset. And the system's not better. I guess if they're guilty, they'll be back in the end.
What do you think about that, Ms. Ford?
I think that that's probably right. It's probably because we put such a high value on freedom, liberty, people's rights. So we'd rather protect them and let a few guilty people go.
I think there's an idea there that we need to be very careful. We're not talking about a money damages case like we would have in a civil lawsuit. Mr. Dudley, what do you think about that? Do you think too many guilty people go free? Do you agree with the constitutional requirements that we've talked about?
I think the system coddles criminals a little bit too much, but if you're accused, I think that they should have to prove it. They should have to prove what they say you did.
In this case, Mr. Alvarez, you'll learn as a student from Nicaragua. In this country, a person, even if he or she is not a citizen, enjoys the same procedural rights in a criminal trial as you would as a U.S. citizen. What do you think about that? Does anybody have any opinion on that? Mr. Burr? Do you think a foreign person should enjoy the same rights that you and I enjoy?
I don't know. I guess so.
I mean, we're talking in this case about a foreign person who has been charged with a crime. Do you think he should have the same procedural constitutional rights?
What are you asking? Should we treat somebody differently?
Should we maybe reduce the burden of proof or increase it? Or what do you think? Do you think they should be deported immediately? Anything like that? That's what I said.
If they did it, maybe. I don't know.
We're talking about prior to the state proving their case.
I mean, I guess we don't want criminals from another country in here, but I think you'd still have to prove that they're criminals.
Does anybody feel differently about that? We talked a little bit about drinking. Mr. Burleson, what is your opinion of people who do drink?
I mean, I guess it's their choice. It's just something that I choose not to do. I think some people do it too much. I think other people can handle it and do it fine.
Okay.
But as far as personal, I think it's just a personal choice matter.
What do you mean by some people do it too much? What kinds of people or what kinds of things have you seen that hurt
Well, you
people?
hear stories and friends, people losing their jobs or something because they drink too much, or they go out and get wasted, they're late to work the next day or something like that, or they act differently when they're drunk. Maybe they shouldn't do that. But and there are people on the other hand who can, stay in control and just drink, and not to excess, drink moderately.
Do you have friends from both schools?
Yeah.
What about you, Ms. Ford? What do you think about, obviously you've talked a little bit about the fact that you drink. What do you think about people who drink too much?
I think people who drink too much, if it's to the level of alcoholism or have a sickness, they're sick. It's been diagnosed as a disease, alcoholism. I don't judge them on the basis of their drinking. I don't judge anyone on the basis of their drinking. People can be perfectly good people, just have a problem. So I don't make any judgment based on that.
The drinking issue is important in this case for a lot of reasons, but you need to understand that intoxication, drinking does not necessarily result in intoxication. And you'll hear evidence and differing opinions in this case. But does anyone feel like if someone has something to drink, they should not drive at all? Does anyone feel like that?
Something you mean just anything.
Any
Sip of alcoholic beverage.
beverage. Do you feel like that person should be prohibited from driving?
I don't think anybody should be allowed to drink, period.
Okay. Well, let's talk about that. How could we keep that from happening?
Well, they had a good idea in the teens and 20s about keeping people from drinking.
So you feel like maybe it should be against the law to sell or purchase or consume alcoholic beverages at all?
Lock them up like they do with the druggies.
In this case, you'll hear evidence that Mr. Alvarez did indeed drink on the day he was arrested. Now, the fact that he had something alcoholic to drink, will that affect your ability to judge the case?
Not to judge that he was drunk when he was driving, but I think that it looks very bad on him that he was drinking, period.
Okay. When you say it looks very bad, what do you mean by that?
Says something about his character.
Does anybody feel differently?
I do. Drinking's perfectly legal. That makes no judgment on his character. That's a personal judgment. I mean, I think that's based on your own personal opinion. So yes, I feel differently because my personal opinion is different from him.
It's a sin against God.
Your God.
Okay. Mr. Bird, what do you think about all
I don't know. I think I don't want to get into a holy war here. I mean, I think it's all right for some people. I mean, I don't drink much at all, but some people certainly drink way too much, and that can be a real problem.
How many of you have children? Easier question to answer. Ms. Ford?
I have children.
How old are
Well, I have a 21-year-old son and an 18-year-old daughter.
they? Okay. What have you taught them about drinking and driving? Or have you discussed it with them?
Sure. Sure. My husband and I talked to both of them when they entered high school and told them that if they were ever incapable of driving home or felt like that they were unable to drive, they were to call us, regardless of whether they were drunk or where they were. It was more important that we get them home safely.
When you say that, what do you mean by incapable of driving?
But their faculties, mental and physical faculties, were so disturbed that they couldn't drive home. They're smart children. They know how to make that call.
Do you feel like a person who has been drinking is always incapable of driving home?
No, I don't think so. There have been times when I've had a drink and driven home.
Does anybody feel differently? I think I know Mr. Daly probably does. Anybody? Do you feel differently, Mr. Burles?
I personally don't drink, so I'm always okay to drive, I guess.
What about other people? Do you think?
Well, I guess I got friends, and they seem to do it. I mean, they go out drinking, and I'll be with them and stuff, and they'll drive home, and I guess they're fine. I mean, on the other hand, there's times where I had friends leave a bar and think maybe they shouldn't be driving. Sometimes I'll drive them home or something. We're all going to the same spot.
Mr. Bird, you talked a little bit about being pulled over and arrested for suspicion of DWI. How long ago was that?
Good 5 years ago.
How did you feel when you were pulled over, when you saw the lights in your rearview mirror?
I was scared, yeah.
Why were you scared?
Didn't know what he wanted.
How did being scared affect you, do you think, in terms of how you acted?
I don't know, it just made me nervous, and I may not have been acting the way I normally do just because I was so nervous with this big old cop hanging over me, asking me questions.
Do you think it may have affected your performance on the test you were asked to perform?
It might have, and it probably did for me. And they sure didn't. I don't think it affected the breath thing very much because they finally decided I was okay and let me go home.
Do you remember the kinds of tests you were asked to do?
Not really. It was a while ago.
Do you remember whether or not they were difficult to do well, or do you recall at all?
I don't know. I thought I really don't remember much. It was just pretty simple stuff, I think.
You were also asked, I guess, you submitted an intoxilizer, Bassett.
Yeah, I did.
Okay, and what did you say the results were?
I think it was like a 9 or something.
0.09 or something like that?
That sounds like it might be right.
Did you realize at the time, or do you realize now how close you were to the legal limit in Texas?
No, I don't know. All I know is they let me go. So. I didn't have much to drink that night. What about your guy? How much did he drink?
You'll hear some testimony about that, and I think you'll hear a lot of testimony both from the state and from you'll hear from my client, and you'll hear his version of what happened. He has a constitutional right to remain silent, but in this case, he will not. Let's talk a little bit about the intoxilizer. What we know is it's a device to try to measure a person's blood alcohol concentration. And I'm not going to get into the details of how it does that, but I will tell you it is a device. Different people define it differently, but I guess I define it as a machine. How many of you have lawnmowers? Mow your grass?
Yeah.
Yourself? Or, do you mow your grass yourself?
Yeah, and also I have a tiller to do the fields. I'm a farmer also.
Oh, okay. What do you do? Have you ever had a time when you got ready to mow the grass, got your shoes and shorts and t-shirt on, got ready to mow the grass, and the mower wouldn't start?
Yeah.
How did you feel about that when it did start?
I wanted to throw the damn thing in the street and run over it a few times.
Does it happen very often that your motor doesn't start up like it should?
No.
What kinds of things do you have to do to make sure that that doesn't happen very much?
Put gas in there, the adequate mix of the gas and the oil. Make sure the spark plug is in good shape, that's about it.
Okay. Would you consider the mower a machine that you use?
Of course.
And it helps you do certain things, does it?
Yeah,
It'd be awful hard to mow that grass by hand, wouldn't it?
right. Well, we can bring in one of the goats, I guess.
Sure. Don't have a problem with those starting.
Yeah.
How do you feel about, Mr. Burleson, how do you feel about a device such as an intoxilizer, which you'll learn a lot more about? How do you feel about a device like that being a significant factor in whether or not a person is convicted of a crime?
Well, I guess if it's accurate, I mean, it can accurately gauge whatever you're looking for. I guess that's even better than having, people talk about it or have people, you remove the human error, it seems like. I mean, if it's a good machine, it's perfect, then that would be great. It'd be like having a video camera follow you everywhere.
What kinds of things are you going to want to know about that machine?
Well, I guess how it works and how accurate it is.
Are you going to want to know what it takes to maintain it?
Sure.
What things need to be done to keep it operating properly?
Sure.
What about you, Ms. Ford? How do you feel about the intoxilizer?
Well, if it's accurate, it's probably saves the police a lot of time.
How do you think you'll determine whether or not it's accurate?
Well, I suppose that I'll hear testimony from both of your sides as to whether or not it's accurate and make my judgment based on that.
Let's suppose someone's pulled over for a DWI, suspicion of DWI, and the person agrees to take the intoxilizer test. And we're talking in generalities here. What do you think that person thinks about what do you think the average person who agrees to take the intoxilizer thinks about their intoxication at that time? Mr. Burke? You obviously have personal experience.
I mean, I don't know what the average person thinks, but I knew I wasn't drunk. So. Yeah, is that normal? I mean, what does the average person think? I don't know.
I don't know that. I don't know that. Obviously, I've handled a lot of these cases, but I haven't handled enough to know what the average person thinks.
I haven't handled any of them, so I sure don't know.
Let's talk a little bit about DWI. One thing you need to know is that DWI is one of the few things you can be convicted of based on the opinion of a person. You'll hear testimony from the police officer in this case, the officer who arrested Mr. Alvarez. You'll hear testimony from other officers who were at the scene shortly after the initial stop. I expect you'll hear evidence not only from Mr. Alvarez's testimony, but from some people that were with him that night. What do you think about people who people will come sit in the witness box and offer you different opinions about Mr. Alvarez's state that night? What kinds of things are you going to consider in evaluating who to believe? Because you're going to have to do that if you're selected as a jury. Ms. Ford, what kinds of things are you going to consider in determining who do I believe?
Well, I'll probably consider the way they look when they're testifying and discrepancies between what they say, and if there are two people that say it's one thing and that person says it's something else, then that's probably some indication. Their history, just what they're all about, what they do.
Let's talk about a person's history, and one of the things I'd like to talk about is bias, or the experience that we all bring into remembering things and then telling other people about it. What are some possible areas that you could see a police officer differing from a normal person? I mean, why would a police officer have a different version than a normal person who's seen an event? Mr. David, I'm sorry.
That's right.
Well, my brother's a DPS trooper, and he thinks that everybody's guilty.
Okay. So, would it be accurate to say that because of your brother's experience as a trooper, he tends to be biased toward believing people are guilty?
Yeah, he's very cynical about people.
Okay.
Thinks everybody's lying. Thinks that if he suspects you of doing something, then he right away, he basically that's good enough for him.
Okay. Do you agree with him all the time?
No,
Why do you think it is your brother's experiences?
that's his training.
Do you think he's trained to be cynical and skeptical?
Yeah. That's his job,
Sure.
to catch what he thinks are crooks. And
How
it's
do-
your job to bring out the truth here.
How do you think that might affect his testimony in a trial if he were to have to testify? Obviously, he probably has.
No, I would take his view as just one view of what happened that evening. And look at it through, well, this guy also automatically considers people to be guilty, because that's his job.
So being cynical would affect the way he remembers things. Is that
Yeah.
accurate?
Yeah.
Would you give his testimony or any officer's testimony any more or less weight than a non-police officer?
No. Cop's just a person.
So they're kind of on an equal playing field. You wouldn't give.
All
either.
people are the same.
Does anybody feel differently?
Okay, why don't we cut it off there? Before we have them talk a little bit about this, answer questions, did anybody change their mind about who they would select as defense and state jurors from the time Ms. Bell finished to the time Mr. Bassett finished? Marcia?
I said Paco was state to begin with, and I thought he could be a good defenseman.
Yeah. Anybody else start to change their mind about whether or not Paco might be a juror for the defense? No? Anybody else had to change their mind on any juror? Hillary?
I changed my mind on John. First I thought he was a state's witness, but I think maybe he could be a good defense witness also.
Anybody else?
I changed my mind on Betsy. I thought she would be state at first, and then she started talking about liberty and freedom.
In the United States.
What's going on here? How come y'all changed your mind? You got a pretty good dose of, Cynthia did a very good job of state voir dire there. What is it that was going on that helped you change your mind or made you change your mind? Yeah?
The questions being asked, I mean, it brings out different aspects of the people's personalities.
Okay, what was it Sam was, and you notice something really important goes on in voir dire. And it's the one place I think the defense has a distinct advantage over the state. Cynthia has the job as prosecutor. It's very different, I think, than what the defense attorney has to do. She's got to get up and take a cold juror panel and at least give them some basic structure of what the trial is going to be about, what the charges are, who has burdens of proof. She has a lot of kind of educating to do before she can get to the part of the voir dire where she can start pulling the people out and getting to their real personalities. And that's a real stress on the prosecution because she's doing a number of different things all at one time. And there's just so much attention and time you're going to have to do that. And meanwhile, while she's doing all that, what does the defense attorney do? He's watching the jurors and is able to watch them much more closely than she is because she's working. And Sam gets to sit back here and watch these jurors. And he's already, by the time the state finishes, the defense attorney has a pretty good view of who this jury panel is, where the hot spots are, and who they want to pursue more, right? And then Sam comes in, and he doesn't have to do all that. He can come in, and what were the kind of questions he was asking? What were the words he was using? What do you feel about? What do you think? What are your attitudes? And what does that do? What are those called? Open-ended questions. And what are they doing? They're just letting people kind of start regurgitating. And when you do that, after a while, they loosen up and it really starts to come out. And it is surprising how you can change your view once you get under that surface level. Paco's a great example. I mean, nobody would have taken him after the first 20 minutes of voir dire. No defense attorney. Cynthia would have taken him more minutes. But I'll bet Cynthia started rethinking that a little bit towards the last, didn't he?
He was changing his
That's right.
opinions a little bit.
A little more of that, and you might have been striking him, and Sam might have been asking for him. But you've been thinking about it. It's an interesting issue. Y'all have questions for that? Well, first, why don't you just kind of explain, what each of you quickly, what it is you're trying to do in voir dire and how you do it, your theories on it.
I'm gonna sit up here, so can you see y'all? This really, a 20-minute voir dire, you really can't, it's very difficult to capsulize voir dire in 20 minutes, but what I try to do, and Mr. Shepherd is absolutely right, when I get up, I have to, initially, I do a lot of talking at the jury, and I always apologize for that because you will find very quickly you start losing people. People don't like, I don't think they like lawyers in general, and they certainly don't like to sit and be talked at by lawyers at length. So I try to make that the period where I talk at the jury as brief as I possibly can, and then I try to get them to talk to me as much as I possibly can, and I try to do as much individual voir dire as I can. On a misdemeanor panel, it's one thing I found that's different about felony prosecution. It's a lot harder, I think, to get to talk to everybody because the panels are so much bigger on felonies. I didn't realize that I had that luxury when I was voir diring a misdemeanor panel, because there are only 18 people. And you can pretty much get to everybody and get everybody's viewpoint. I think one of the things that is the most frightening that attorneys often do inadvertently is a couple of people in the middle of the panel that never said a word. And you know, you come up time to strike and you've really got some people you got to strike, and you're going through and you get to this person and you know, you ask your partner, well, what did he say? Well, I don't have anything. And so you have no idea if this person is a, you know, big drinker or what, or, you know, would be bad or good for you. And I really think the longer I practice law and the more trials I do, I really think you either win or lose your case in voir dire. I mean, I think it's you know, it's the most critical part of the trial. I mean, I really believe that. And it's something that I need to work on a lot. It's not one of my strong points, but that's where you win or lose the case. And you know, I will say one thing about Mr. Berg. What is your real name?
David.
David. Some prosecutors might say, oh God, I don't know, you know, I'm gonna strike that guy for sure because he's been arrested and drugged down there. But that would be a person I might have to think about because this is an intoxilizer case, and you know, as it went, he went down there, he took the test, he wasn't intoxicated, and they let him go. Now, he might be a person that would be the very kind of person you want on the panel because he might be the one back there going, well, you know, this guy blew a 1 too, you know. I mean, I blew an 09 and you know, I wasn't drunk and it worked for me. So, you know, situations like that can, you know, they may not be as bad as they seem to initially.
One of the first things I try to do is to get the stink off the defense table. People, after hearing the state's voir dire, after hearing what, particularly if you're talking about a felony case, a rape case, or a homicide, or something like that, after the state sits down, there's like this stench around your table and trying to get through it. So one of the first things I like to do is to try to be a little bit vulnerable in terms of giving a personal example from my own life and relate it to what I'm trying to do with voir dire. I think what that does is it shows the jury that I'm willing to say something about myself, even if it's a little bit embarrassing or stupid, and therefore maybe they'll feel a little more comfortable about talking. Second thing I try to do early on is get the flag waving going a little bit as far as the Constitution. I think that's one of the first things I feel an absolute duty to do during voir dire is to get these people to understand that these aren't just Mr. Alvarez's rights in this case. These are your rights, and these are your children's rights, and your parents' rights, and these are my rights. Get them kind of going on that at least a little bit, so at least they're a little more receptive to being critical listeners in the case. After that's done, then I like to move into the issues of the case. And depending on how serious I think the issue is, that's how long I'll spend on it. Obviously, drinking and attitudes about alcohol in this case are critical. You'll notice I didn't spend nearly as much time, and I've tried this, I didn't do this the last time I did this case, but I felt like I needed to touch on the foreign student issue. The problem says that Mr. Alvarez has a thick accent, and I wanted to make sure there weren't any rednecks on the jury who thought we should just bust the foreigners out if they got in trouble. The drinking issue is critical, the intoxilizer issue is critical. I like to really spend as much time as possible on that. And the opinion issue, police officers versus other people, that's critical too. But obviously, you know, I like to try to swing the panel a little bit my way at the beginning and then get into the issues of the case. And then I like to try to end on an up note too, to try to keep them on my side, at least until the state starts putting on their oath. And I also, one other thing I've mentioned as a general concept is I like to let them do a lot more talking than I do. It's hard as a law student, you're trained to learn the facts and read the case law and be in control. I really feel like voir dire is an opportunity, a critical time for you to let go a little bit of control, especially as a defense lawyer. It's a time for you to be Phil Donahue rather than Alan Dershowitz.
Any questions? Yeah, Marcia.
It could just be the difference in your personalities, but you seemed more in control of the situation and more, just more in control, where you seem more touchy-feely in general. I mean, I understand we have different roles,
I
but
think
is
that
this?
accurately describes the two of us.
Is it just a personality difference? I mean, is this?
I think it is, and it's another thing that, I mean, I think it's the prosecution lends that to it also, the fact that our respective sides that we are on. Initially, I think I have to be a little bit more in control. However, that is an observation that has been made to me by other people that have been on my juries, and it's one that I take to heart. And if the thing had been longer and there were more people, I get where I get very, I'm cracking jokes and I am making myself more personable. But I've been told by other people that I have that facade, and I don't think it's a good one to maintain throughout the voir dire. And I always try to tone myself down once I get through the initial part of it.
So you want to shell up, I guess is my
Oh,
question.
sure. Oh, sure.
And
More,
this, as prosecution voir dires go, this was very open-ended in my experience.
Cynthia does a better voir dire than most of the prosecutors, and that's one reason she wins more cases than a lot of prosecutors. I think that's a big reason.
I'd like to add just a couple of kind of practical observations. I think that it's crucial, as Cynthia touched on, she asked her partner, I think it's absolutely crucial that you have a second set of eyes and ears in the courtroom while you're doing voir dire. You can take notes while the state is doing voir dire, but I think the person doing the voir dire should have their hands free, not be sitting there trying to take notes. People should start noticing what you write down and what you don't write down. So your hands should be free, and you should have somebody else taking notes. And if you're talking, you could, depending on the courtroom, you could have people as spread out as this. If you're talking to juror number 10, you don't know what juror number 31 is doing. You want to know if he's picking his nose and looking out the window during your voir dire, or is he really listening to what you say, because that's important. There is a certain, I believe, a certain amount of body language when you're doing voir dire also. If you're talking to a juror who's kind of rocking back and going like this, and then with a stated voir dire, you're very open and receptive, that tells you something. I also look for little, machine gun type acts, and what are they reading? Are they walking in with the National Observer, or are they walking in with the Wall Street Journal? They have books, they have sewing, and all these things tell you something, and that's why you need another set of eyes and ears in the courtroom to help you see if this juror is really relating to the state, or to the judge, or to you, or nobody. They'd rather be somebody else, someplace else. Of course, they'd all rather be someplace else. But anyway, I just wanted to have those observations.
If you don't remember anything else that we teach you about voir dire, there's one essential fundamental aspect of it that so many lawyers miss, and it's the whole difference between whether you're successful or not successful. And that is, you are not going to get up in front of any of these people and in an hour or 2 hours change their fundamental view of life and people in the world around you. It ain't going to happen, folks. You're not going to get up and talk them into viewing the world differently and having different attitudes. What you need to do on voir dire, instead of wasting your time, as so many lawyers do, trying to convince people to no longer be a Republican but a Democrat, or no longer a conservative but a liberal. It's not gonna happen. What you need to do is you need to let them talk, to let you understand what their views are and what makes them tick. And throw away all these old maxims of, well, you don't take certain professions for this kind of case, depending on which side you're on, or this religion. That is all horseshit. People are far too complex for those kinds of silly little rules to apply. And I think Paco was a good example, or an example of a couple of them here. As it started going along, you started getting the understanding there are layers to these personalities. And that on first glance, these people, when they're talking to you, say things on one subject and say, well, I'm not sure I want them as a juror. But if you keep them talking and they talk about several different aspects of the case, it may turn out that on another aspect, they are so strong your way that you do want them on your jury. And that's happened to me. We had one where we were trying to aggravate sexual assault of a child last November, I guess it was. And there was one juror I wasn't going to take for anything. I mean, just wasn't. And wasn't even going to really talk to him. And then I asked him some question. He got into one of the open-ended deals. I saw him shake his head. And boy, he just started venting on the subject. And when it was over, the state struck this guy. That's how strong he was. He had an emotional reaction to part of this case that was very, very defense-oriented, very surprising. And we never would have known that if we just sat there and talked to him. You've got to open these open-ended questions and give the people talk. And the more they talk, the more you're going to learn. And that's really what voir dire is all about. And Cynthia's absolutely right. Jury trials, most jury trials, are going to be closely fought contests in their living. You can go either way. Those are always going to be won in voir dire. By what 12 people sit on the jury. It's going to make a difference in who wins and loses.
One last thing, whether you're doing voir dire or not, if you're a male and female, if you're female juries, empty pockets there, nervousness and starting. Because the jury's going to, it's going to be distracting. So my first thing I do is dump everything in the case.
When you go out and practice, and those of you who decide you do want to be trial lawyers, go to as many of the seminars that are being put on now about voir dire jury selection as you can. There's a bunch of them out now, and there's some really useful, interesting information being provided in those. There's been a lot of new thinking about jury selection in the last 5-10 years. I went to a seminar on the 16th of this month. I thought it was real interesting. Had lots of interesting data and tips. Discussing even the points of which way you can tell people are lying to you depending on where they're looking with their eyes. I'm sure some of y'all have gone through some of that training. Body language. Some people think as much as 90% of the information that people receive or project is nonverbal. But get out and learn this stuff because that's really where the action is. I think any intelligent person can learn pretty quickly the skills of direct examination, cross-examination, and the easiest part of the trial, which is closing argument. Those are all pretty simple stuff compared to the voir dire part of the trial. And they are not as important as the voir dire part of the trial. So that's where you need to be spending your first year or two really polishing those skills, because those are the fundamental tools of it. Okay, anything else?